Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Susan said, my name is Nicole Fields, and I'm an attorney here at Pace Women's Justice Center in the Training, Outreach, and Education Department. Before we start specifically on Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I just wanted to give you a little background on our center and what we do here. We are a nonprofit center. We provide free civil legal services to anybody, despite what our name implies. Our name goes back to when our center opened in the early 90s and the battered women syndrome, which is where it started. And that's why we have the word women in our name, but we help anybody, not just women. Also, it doesn't matter what your immigration status is. And it also, for many of our services, doesn't matter what your financial status is. You could have a penny to your name or millions of dollars to your name. For many of our services, that does not matter. One of our services that is free, and well, all of our services are free, but one of the services that it doesn't matter where you live and it doesn't matter how much money you have is our legal helpline. And I'll be giving you the phone number for that. You can call our legal helpline. It's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So it's not a 24-hour hotline, it's a helpline. And it's also multilingual. You can call that helpline and you can ask questions on a variety of legal topics. You won't receive actual legal advice, but what you will receive are resources, referrals, and somebody on the other end will help figure out what exactly you are looking for, what information you do need. And if it fits the criteria for what we do here, you then might be eligible for our walk-in clinic, which is now, you can walk in without an appointment. You can call and make an appointment. You can have it over the phone or do it virtually via computer access if you do have access to a computer. And you can receive a free 1-hour legal consultation. And that, again, can be on a variety of topics. What we do here at Pace Women's Justice Center is we help people who are victims of domestic violence, sex abuse, sex assault, victims of elder abuse. That's the majority of what we do here. We also have in the family courts within Westchester. That means White Plains, Yonkers, and soon to be New Rochelle, and soon meaning within a few weeks. We have attorneys actually in those courthouses. And you can go to any of those family courts without an appointment. You can meet with an attorney. You can tell them your situation. If you're dealing with a domestic violence situation, if you're dealing, any sexual assault, relationship, if you're having any intimate partner relationship with somebody. And that doesn't mean it has to be sexual in nature. It just has to be more than a casual relationship with somebody. And the lawyer there can help fill out a petition for an order of protection and will actually appear before a judge with you to get that emergency order of protection. We also do direct representation here in our family law unit, where that does depend on how much money you make, and there's all criteria regarding that. But we do direct representation and can help people with divorces, child custody issues, visitation, and things like that. We also have an elder justice unit where we have specific attorneys that work on that and also do some advanced life planning documents. Susan and I, in addition to doing the training, outreach, and education, where we go, throughout the community and try to raise awareness about our center, and also do trainings for advocates, other attorneys, police officers. What we also do are sex assault cases and Title IX cases. The Title IX cases are on school campuses, mostly college campuses, where people are victims of either sexual assaults or sexual harassment. And if that happens where a student is a student of a particular college, and something happens on a campus, then, we can help them civilly again, nothing criminal, but civilly, we can help them with those cases. So that's, what we do here at Pace Women's Justice Center. So at the end of the session, we'll be giving our helpline number. So if you or you ever know anybody who, ever needs our help or any resources or referrals, please feel free to, give us a call. As I believe it was either Jackie or Valerie talked about at the beginning of the session, this is April, and this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about sexual assaults. And why are we even talking about it? Why is there a Sexual Assault Awareness Month? Well, unfortunately, it is very common in this country, and we have way too many sexual assaults. And I just want to share some statistics with you. In the United States, there is a sexual assault every 68 seconds. So that is just a little more than a minute. So if you think about it, almost, a little more than every minute, there is one sexual assault in this country. 1 in 6 United States women are a victim of an attempt or a completed rape in this country. 55% of sexual assaults happen near a victim's home. 23% of LGBTQ college students have been sexually assaulted. 8 in 10 sexual assault victims know their perpetrators. Although what we, hear in the news, and I think what people talk about and what scares us most is kind of the idea of a random stranger pulling, just coming out of the bushes and, pulling us into a dark alley. As I said, 8 out of 10 victims know the perpetrator. With regards to men, it's hard to get a proper reading or statistic on that because it's vastly underreported. The statistics that they do have are about 3% of men have been victimized, but everybody that works in this field think that is, definitely much higher than that. But because of societal norms and a whole bunch of other reasons, sexual assaults in general are very underreported, but especially by men, it's underreported. So although the current statistics show about 3% of men have been victims of sexual assaults, it's probably much higher than that. The highest age bracket for sexual assaults are 18 to 24-year-olds. So that's about the college and, right after college age. And although that's the highest age group that's at risk, any age group can be a victim. And unfortunately, every age group is, from young children all the way up to very elderly people in, nursing homes. And with regard to elderly people, any action against an elderly person that's sexual in origin and unwanted anything is considered a sex assault. And that also includes any sexual contact with an elderly person who's unable to consent. And that also includes things like dementia, Alzheimer's, and, anything with mental illness. So anybody who is unable to consent, either because of their mental status, or because of their age, they're too young. In New York State, if you're under 17, you're legally incapable of consent. So, that also counts for not being able to consent. So, in addition to your not being mentally able to have the capacity, also age, if you're under 17, you're not able to consent. So when we think about some of these statistics and how high and shocking they are, but then at the same time, we realize, well, wait a second, even as high as they are, this crime is so underreported. In fact, rape is the most underreported crime in this country. Fewer than 20% of rapes are reported, which is really shocking if we go back to the statistic that 1 in 6 U.S. women are a victim of either attempted or completed rape. For every 1,000 rapes, 995 of the perpetrators go unpunished. So if you think about that, it's a really shocking number. So, what are some of the reasons, or why? Why is this such an underreported crime? I mean, if your car got broken into, I think most people would have no hesitation about calling the police, or if your home were burglarized, or if you were the victim of a robbery. I think most people would not have any hesitation in calling the police. Yet, when somebody is a victim of a rape or a sexual assault, why are fewer than 20% of these crimes reported? Well, there's often a fear of reprisal. And when you think about the statistic that 8 out of 10 victims know their perpetrator, that makes sense. Often, again, because they know their perpetrator, they often don't want to get that person in trouble. A lot of times, the victim either feels guilty or ashamed or blaming themselves in some way, either by the way they behave, by the way they dress. Perhaps they felt they did something to cause it, or they were at least partially to blame. Often victims of sexual assaults are worried that they won't be believed by the police. And some of that has to do with the news media, TV shows, just our society, in general. And I think how victims of sexual assault are treated. Also, oftentimes, and especially with, the age group of 18 to 24-year-olds, a lot of times alcohol and drugs are involved, and, sometimes also used by the victim themselves. So when that just adds another layer that makes it more complex, and then the victim thinks, well, that is my fault. Either I also, was drunk, or I took some drugs, or that's partially my fault. So that's just another thing that victims often feel it was partially their fault. In terms of the effect that this has, this isn't a, one-time bad incident that happens to people that is easy to get over. Although like I said, sexual assaults happen to everybody because of the statistics that we do have. The statistics are mostly geared towards women because of the vastly underrating, underreporting by the men. So a lot of the statistics I have are for women. So I just want to make that clear. It's not that in any way we think it's not happening to men. It's just the statistics that are out there. But 94% of women experience PTSD for 2 weeks following a sexual assault. 30% of women are still experiencing PTSD for 9 months after a sexual assault. 33% of women who are raped contemplate suicide, and 13% actually attempt suicide. And 37% of people who are victims of sexual assault experience work, family, school, friend struggles and issues, all because of the assault. And victims of sexual assaults are also much more likely to use substances, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. So in addition to awareness of just, how much this is going on, we wanted to let everybody know, well, what do you do if, God forbid, you or somebody were to become a victim of a sexual assault? What are your options? Well, you have a couple options. One, you can call the police. If you call the police and the police feel there's enough evidence for an arrest, then it goes to criminal court, and now you have a criminal matter. Now, criminal court is different from civil court because that train is driven by the DA's office. So here in Westchester, we have the Westchester DA's office. And that means the victim isn't the one in charge of the case. The victim is a witness. Both Susan and I were criminal prosecutors for a long time before we came here, and those are the kind of cases we handled. In criminal court, you have a much higher standard. Your burden of proof is high. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And the offender, can go to jail if they plead guilty, or if you go to a trial and they're, found to be guilty, and the offender can be put on a sex registry, a sex offender registry. Oftentimes you can get an order of, protection from a judge, but it's a long process. It's a hard process. Often, if there is no plea, meaning the defendant pleads guilty, the victim has to testify. And sometimes you can seek some compensation depending on if there are any damages, to property, or if you need some medical expenses paid. In addition to the criminal route, if there is an intimate partner relationship, you can go to family court. Now, family court, you don't have to choose. You can go to criminal and family court, or you can go to family court. You can do both at the same time. Now, the difference with family court is family court, you're the one in charge. Okay, you can choose to bring the case. You can choose to withdraw the case. That's up to you. It's faster than criminal court. You can ask for that order of protection. It can be very specific. It's a lower burden. It's a lower standard of proof. It's preponderance of the evidence. It's easier to seek restitution for any medical expenses or property damage, but it is almost impossible to obtain any civil money judgment. With respect to either a criminal or civil case, there are statutes of limitations to think about, meaning how long you have to bring either kind of case in court. And recently in 2019, there were some acts passed which extended the time that you have. So in criminal court, you used to have 5 years for sex offenses, and now you have 10 years. And in family court or civil court, you used to have 3 years, and now you have 20 years. So that definitely, changes things. And in addition to criminal and civil, as I briefly mentioned earlier, kids that are in college, there's Title IX. Every school has a Title IX officer, and they have Title IX policies. So if you are a victim of sexual assault, abuse, or harassment on a college campus or a college sanctioned property or at a college event, and you're a student, you can choose to go to the Title IX office there. And we handle those cases here, and Susan and I handle those cases, and Susan has been, doing this for a while, and, she has some interesting cases that she can talk to you about or share some details if you'd like to.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. I just wanted, now that Nicole's given a really good lay of the land in terms of sexual assault and how they can be, both how they are vastly underreported, clearly how so many victims don't report ever, or certainly have a delay in reporting, and your options. I just wanted to highlight, before I talk about that case, a little bit about if you know someone who has experienced sexual assault, or, and God forbid, or you're trying to help a family or member or yourself. And now that you know sort of the general lay of the land of criminal, civil, and Title IX, things to consider in the moment are that if you're looking to pursue your matter potentially criminally, it is to gather evidence. One of the main things police do and ask the victims to do when a report is first made, contemporaneous in time with the assault, is to send that victim to a hospital for a safe or sane examination, meaning a experienced nurse examiner and doctor who are familiar with how to gather evidence in a sexual assault and how to treat a crime victim in a compassionate, trauma-informed way will conduct that exam on the victim survivor. Here in Westchester Medical Center runs our Safe Sane program, and they have a terrific team of advocates. They have a hotline, 24/7 hotline. And again, I'm going to put our legal helpline up before the end of the presentation. And if you want any resources, you can call our legal helpline and get them all as well for each individual site. But they will have an advocate accompany that victim survivor. The one caveat I want to say, because people tend not to report these crimes at all, or if they do with a significant delay, that for most evidence to be recovered, whether it's evidence of intoxication, evidence perhaps if the victim believes they might have been drugged or roofied and therefore were unable to consent due to some sort of drug interaction that wasn't consensually consumed, or even if it was, that left them unable to consent, that window is about 96 hours after consumption. So I know for Nicole and I both in our past lives as prosecutors, but certainly now here, the heartbreaking thing can be at times when we have a victim survivor of any gender or identity tell us, several weeks after an offense that they're just starting to disclose it and they would like a criminal prosecution, and the offense involves someone they know. And there's several evidence issues that would pop up for a prosecutor and a police officer to then say we have enough to pursue this criminally. And one would be, even if the victim were willing to go to the hospital a week, 2 weeks later, they would be likely very unable to trace anything in terms of what was consumed to the night or day of that incident and be able to make a link as to the victim's ability to consent or not consent. The second thing is preservation of evidence, right? In terms of a lot of times the natural inclination for most sexual assault victims after they've been assaulted is to, throw their clothes away, put them in the wash, hop in the shower, wash their sheets or clothing, do anything to try to erase the memories of that event. The problem with that, of course, from a criminal perspective, is that you then no longer have any physical evidence of the act. Unfortunately, since so many of these crimes are committed between people who know one another, oftentimes a defendant's defense is it was a consensual act. So sure, you're going to find evidence of some sort of sexual interaction because that occurred and it occurred consensually. Now, that being said, it's still valuable evidence no matter what the defendant would put forth. And so as a former prosecutor or as a former police officer would want, ideally, if a victim was reporting that incident, that assault right away, to have that victim preserve their clothes in a brown paper bag, not to wash any sheets, not to wash themselves, not even to actually use the bathroom, to actually go to the hospital first, get the test, get the urine analysis, and all those things done before any evidence could be dissipated or contaminated by washing or by just removal from the body through just normal life processes. So I say that saying it's an awful thing to have to consider, because for most of our sexual assault victims, this is not a crime, as Nicole was describing, like a burglary or, your car being broken into, which are upsetting things, admittedly, certainly, and feel like a violation. But they don't impact someone as personally as a sexual assault does, and therefore people are more willing to report that immediately. But with sexual assault, statistically, people tend not to report them immediately, or if at all. And therefore, this valuable evidence gathering and these things that would help them prove a criminal matter or even substantiate a civil or personal case against a defendant are lost to them because of the nature of the crimes, that they're just not able to report these offenses right away and get that evidence retrieved and tested in the way you would. I would want to add in terms of, even if your friend or neighbor or yourself went to the hospital, please know that you can choose to go to the hospital and have a rape kit done and not report to the police. So we work with students, particularly in Title IX matters, who might come to us and say, this happened last night. I don't know if I want to go the criminal route, but I'm not sure. And if this is something that is still consideration, if they're looking for offender accountability that only a criminal process can provide, because in family court, no one is going to jail, right? Family court is not offender accountability. It was set up to keep families together historically. So you can, as Nicole said, there are some valuable resources there, an order of protection, potential restitution for medical or property damage, a sense for the victim that they are being heard, that they're able to tell their story and they're getting some sort of redress. But no respondent will ever become a criminal defendant in family court from that action, from a family court action. No one will be put on a family court, on a sex offender registry in New York State, even if there's a finding in family court. That doesn't trigger an offender notification because the standards are different and it's not a criminal process. So if that victim survivor is seeking offender accountability, sexual offender registry, those sorts of things, that can only happen in a criminal process, which is criminal reporting. And so therefore, in terms of when they report, how evidence is gathered makes a huge difference in whether or not that option is something that could potentially be open to them. If a rape kit is done, they have the ability to preserve that evidence and then at some point in the future, report to the police. And at that time, they sign a release with the police department and the police officer takes that kit to a police lab and it's tested. You've probably heard in the news several years back that historically across the US, there was a backlog of rape kits just lingering, like some for 20 years, which is awful when you think people were out there, victims put themselves through testing, and that yet these kits were never tested. So laws across the country were changed. And in New York State now, police have up to 90 days, the police lab, to test that kit. Now, I want to tell you anecdotally, if it's a press case, if it's multiple rapes, if the offender is caught and it's, on the news tonight, it is likely that that kit is fast-tracked. If it's a victim, perhaps a college student who went to the hospital, then delayed reporting for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and the perpetrator is someone that person knows, again, and again, I want to be super clear, if I slip into she or he at any point, unfortunately, everyone can be a victim of this offense. It's not limited to a gender or identity. But now the police have 90 days. So those cases sometimes will take up to 90 days, depending on how backlogged the police lab is. So for that period of time, for our clients, it can be very disheartening where they are waiting on hearing a final decision from police or prosecutors, and the police and prosecutors, certainly our prosecution office, Westchester DA's office and the Special Victims Unit is fantastic. They're committed, dedicated, thoughtful, intelligent people, and they truly care. But they need that test kit back too, to look at that evidence. And I see a couple questions popping up and I'll look at them in a second and answer, but let me just finish this thought, as I do appreciate you guys asking questions and I love the fact that this is interactive. So as a sexual assault victim, we always caution our clients, be cooperative, share information with the police. If you've gotten the kit, make sure they know that, make sure you sign the document so the lab can test it. But understand you're going to have to be patient. And particularly since most of these cases involve parties who are known to each other, who may have had a consensual relationship in the past, or even at the night of the day of the crime, that these cases are extremely difficult. And within the parameter of extremely difficult, what is often the most difficult are cases where not only are the parties known to each other, but there's allegations that they were consuming drugs or alcohol consensually. And that the victim then says there was a period of time when he or she or they don't remember what happened, but they woke up and therefore they believe it must have been not a consensual act because they don't fully remember it. And I can tell you, unfortunately, as truthful and credible and as traumatic it is for that survivor, and we completely understand that, it is a very difficult case to prosecute. If that's the evidence the prosecution and police are working with, then because of case law in New York, what a common person like me would think normally, if I didn't know the case law, if I don't remember it and I said I had more to drink than I've ever had, then clearly it must have been physical incapacitation, and that person who did this to me should be criminally arrested. But the reality is the standards under case law are quite different, which is why it's so important to have a blood or alcohol test to substantiate how incapacitated, for example, if I, the victim, was, to meet that burden. That me just telling police a month, a week, a year later that, I had 3 drinks, but I've had 3 drinks before and I've never felt like that, therefore I must have been given a drug, or I must have then had something put in my alcohol and therefore I couldn't consent if I can't remember it, unfortunately would not meet the standard for criminal prosecution. Before I address more, I just want to take a quick look at the chat if I could, to see the questions that were asked. Okay. How does it, I'm going to just read the first question aloud. How does it work when there's a crime and DNA is used when you're the sexual assault victim, and then years later you're the criminal and your DNA is used when you were a victim? How is that fair? Well, the way it's supposed to work, and part of the, sort of the changes in DNA for crimes across the country also involve that police are now using databases from like things like 23andMe and other things like that, where people are familiar lines and tracing it that way. But they are supposed to preserve your DNA when you're a crime victim. That DNA is not supposed to go into a data bank or testing for criminal defendants. So it shouldn't be the case, in New York State, they're not supposed to mix the DNA in terms of one size fits all, that if your home is burglarized and they take your DNA to see if it matches any property retrieved from a defendant's home, for example, or that. So if you find, and I'm not, that is the case, I would suggest, that is not how the system is meant to operate, and there are supposed to be protections within it. Now that isn't, so that wouldn't be fair. If they had gone and gotten a search warrant, perhaps, I'm trying to extrapolate from there, that I can think they could seek perhaps breaking that wall of victim DNA if they had evidence leaking. For example, let's say it's me, that I was a victim of a crime, I give my DNA for a burglary, no one's arrested. Years later, I'm committing a crime against my neighbor, a burglary, and it turns out I've committed 3 other burglaries in my town. The police have profiled me. They perhaps have still images from a Ring camera of me going in and out of my neighbor's house, and they're aware that there's this DNA sample in a database that could link me to this crime. They could potentially use that information and go to court and seek a court authorization to get my DNA. Now, that being said, they would be better off, and I think more likely they would choose to find a way to get my DNA in some other fashion, which I'm sure you've heard on the news, whether it's retrieving something from my trash or calling me in for questioning, offering me a glass of water, and then when I leave voluntarily, they could take that glass or cup and test it. So it would probably be an easier and cleaner way for them to obtain my DNA in that sense. But if, certainly the systems aren't set up that the police have a right to go into both victim and suspect DNA. So that would be a real concern if that happened somehow. And if it did, anyone would certainly have a right to speak to a civil attorney and see if there's any redress. Now, that being said, if you're if it is your DNA and you are convicted of, and you potentially committed a crime, you're going to be speaking to an attorney anyway, because in addition to your DNA issues being violated, you're looking at new charges. So you're probably having lots of conversations around that. But I can understand why people are worried about their DNA. People, that's something that is unique to all of us. And, from familial lines, as Nicole just said, if you have kids and they have my DNA sample, then, they also have the ability with some probability to link, if my two children commit a crime, to link back that they're related to me. So it totally makes sense why DNA retrieval and safeguards are a concern for anyone here in this call.
And just to piggyback on that, and you hear in the news every day now that a lot of police and prosecutors are solving crimes using the genealogy DNA. They're finding defendants based on DNA in like the defendant's system based on like a cousin or an uncle, and then they're doing research and investigation and finding, solving a lot of cases that way.
Right.
So it's just, with science and research and technology, every day, every year, it's becoming more and more updated, and that's just where we are now.
Right. Which again, if you're concerned about your privacy, calls into question, as the question did, how you can safeguard your personal information, including DNA, which is unique to you. And if you are ever a criminal victim, you should certainly be asking before you give a DNA sample to police for burglary or any other type of assault. What are the safeguards? There's a period of time they're supposed to keep it, and then they're supposed to destroy it. I off the top of my head, I think it used to be 7 years. I can double check that and let you know, because that's old information, at least a decade ago. So it depends on state and area, how long they keep it. But it is definitely a concern when you share your DNA with any source. Now, that being said, as you all know, DNA is a wonderful tool, particularly in sexual assault. Complicated when it's a consensual matter, because then it's not the definitive, it happened, but it is that, okay, it did happen, and do we have other evidence to prove it was not a consensual act, either the age of the victim, incapacitation due to mental disability, physical incapacitation, or other things of that nature. You didn't cover the revenge porn laws, right? There are laws related around sexual assault and sexual assault awareness, including things such as revenge porn laws. You might be familiar as well, hearing in the news or just generally about sexting issues. And unfortunately, that can happen. We have clients who call us who are 14 years old and they're in middle school, and they think they're sharing consensual images, perhaps with a first relationship they're having, and then that relationship ends, or even if it's still ongoing, that other person they shared these images with has shared it to a broader school base, and they're experiencing harassment, bullying, and sort of the creation of their images being shared, across the school. So there are civil damages, there are possible criminal actions depending on the type of sharing, the age of the participants, and there are federal laws as well that relate to that. So part of our job in training and outreach is also to speak to younger populations about healthy relationships, concerns, since it seems like everybody in Westchester over the age of 6 is now carrying a smartphone. So we want to make sure they're aware that this thing they're living with, particularly since COVID, and sharing images that they don't often think about, including some very private images, that they have to realize they can last for a long period of time, and they can be misused and shared in a wider way that could cause them embarrassment or other concerns. I want to just touch on false reporting. I know we're getting near the end, and I'd love to take more questions if anyone has it, but there's always a perception, and Nicole and I do police trainings as well. And I was a little north of where our office is in White Plains. So I was in the northern part of the county speaking to some officers back in January, and we were discussing sexual assault a little bit. And the officer had related that, well, that's the kind of thing that, people falsely report all the time. And I think we hear in the news, right? I'm thinking of like the Duke Cross case years ago. And, I think there's a perception that this crime is different than other crimes, that it's a crime that is more susceptible to false reporting or to vindictive victim survivors who might report something as being non-consensual or a crime when it didn't happen. And so thinking back to my interactions that night with the officer, because I understood that person had a couple of bad experiences with someone in town who he felt had manipulated the system reporting something. Now, that being said, they've done studies and they found that it's, less than 5% of victims falsely report this type of crime. And actually, that number I've even seen a bit lower, like 3%, because part of what they've often considered as false reporting is whether a crime is unfounded. And an unfounded crime for these statistics is mean that someone might be found not guilty, or it might be unsubstantiated, meaning, the victim did not continue to cooperate, they didn't gather enough evidence to have a criminal prosecution. Now think about it from perspective of a different crime. I report a burglary at my house. The officers come, they don't see any broken doors or windows. I tell them that nothing's missing, but I know that things are in disarray. They might find that that incident is unfounded, right? That doesn't mean that I'm necessarily lying about seeing that things were moved in my house or that someone had entered my house. So there's a stat from Washington State that actually larcenies are falsely reported 7% of the time, right? But no one ever thinks, oh, someone's going to falsely report that someone stole things from their store, right? So it is this type of offense, and it couples with the shame victims can feel and the reasons they may not want to report, particularly since so many of the people are known to each other, the victim and the perpetrator of these crimes, that causes this perception among our community at large that these crimes are falsely reported, but they aren't. And knowing how personal these crimes are, it really takes a lot for the people we work with to actually report them. I wanted to give just a highlight. I know Nicole had mentioned I was going to talk about first I want to talk about resources quickly. We're on with Valerie. She's, Yonkers, NNORC, and she's also connected, I believe, to Westchester Jewish Community Services. They're a wonderful organization that the nonprofit provides mental health and trauma treatment and counseling, and they're a terrific resource to our community and to our victim survivors. There's Westchester Medical Center with the SAVE Rape Crisis 24/7 hotline, crisis intervention counseling, advocacy, working with police and taking the rape kit and working throughout that process. If you're north of the county and you're looking for counseling and support, Putnam Northern Westchester Women's Resource Center, headquartered in Mayapack, but helping Westchester and Putnam residents, is a great place. They have a 24/7 hotline, support groups, and counseling. For Hope Store, my sister's place, they do work with sexual assault victims, but you have to be in an intimate partner relationship with that abuser. So if it is a case where you're not in a domestic violence relationship with your sexual assault offender, then they are going to refer you to other agencies. Victims Assistance Services in Elmsford also works with sexual assault victims. And Family Justice Center right in White Plains is a great resource. When you walk into the family court, run through Westchester County Office for Women can refer you out for all sorts of services, and right there support, counseling, emergency housing, and things of that nature. Just want to highlight quickly, if I've got a minute more, if anyone doesn't have any other questions, just to give you an example of sort of one of our clients who actually ended up using all the systems. She was a young adult. She had been assaulted in Westchester, but she was a student and the perpetrator was a student as well in college upstate. She reported to the police, but she hadn't heard back from the police when she spoke to us. The assault occurred at the end of July. She had gone to the hospital about a week after the assault had happened, but the hospital told her there was no value in her going through the trauma of a rape examination because there's nothing they could retrieve from her that could be linked back a week before to the crime. There was no bruising or injuries on her, which again, they could still be photographed and taken as photographic evidence, but there would be no benefit because in her case, she said she felt she was drugged by this individual through something being slipped into an alcohol drink, and they wouldn't be able to test that at that period of time. Since she was a student, this other person was a student. She connected with us when she hadn't heard from the local police department. We went with her to the police department and the prosecutor's office. We encouraged them to try to get a voluntary statement from the target, the perpetrator. That person did come in and make a statement to the police, sort of denying, saying it was a consensual act, but that there was no coercion and that there was nothing put in this victim's drink. And then when the victim heard, survivor, in December that the police and prosecutor were not going to prosecute it, she went forward with a Title IX matter. Fortunately for her, in the Title IX matter, since the police weren't releasing the information to her under the Freedom of Information Act, they have a right to hold on to those police reports if they feel they could continue an investigation as long as it's not forever closed. But the school was able to subpoena that tape, the videotape statement of the defendant, which was very useful, and other witness statements. from August, the investigation, and actually after the Title IX hearing, that targeted student, the perpetrator of this incident, was found responsible, and she felt relieved because there was some offender accountability for her because he was suspended and there was a notation on his academic record. I want to add, in his videotape statement, he was incredibly inconsistent and also highlighted gaps that, although the police didn't think were enough, certainly met the burden in a Title IX hearing in college to prove that he committed these offenses. So the last thing I just want to say, I'll put in our chat our helpline number as a good resource for in case you have any questions, want any resources after this for any of the agencies I mentioned. And I don't know, Valerie, if you want to give any particular numbers.
Sorry, had on mute.
Okay.
WJCS's main line I'll put down in the chat as well. And they can refer you from the receptionist.
And if you have any questions, you guys are also welcome to call, our main number, 422-4069. You can certainly talk to me, Susan Carroll, or Attorney Nicole Fields. We'd always be happy to talk to people about their options, particularly since they have this 1-year look back, the Adult Survivors Act in New York State for civil suits, which are incredibly difficult, but still know that the window is closing November 24th. And then it's back to a 3-year civil statute of limitations. So if it's something anybody you know or you work with, if you're from an organization, this is the time to discuss and review it before the window closes November 24th.
If no one has other questions, I have a PACE Women's Justice question that I got a call the other day. Does PACE assist in a bankruptcy hearing for someone who's having a struggle?
Not in a, we help with consumer debt, but we have not participated in a bankruptcy hearing. We've acted as with arbitration and a negotiator, but I don't believe, as far as I know, we've ever participated in a bankruptcy hearing.
Okay, just figured while you're on the phone. And in the chat, somebody's asking if it's legal to carry pepper spray as a defense.
It's funny, you can't get on an airplane with pepper spray, but I believe pepper spray is legal to carry in New York State, but it's not legal to ship, right? So I'm not exactly sure about the parameters around that. I do know it's not legal to fly with pepper spray. So I also, if people are concerned about their individual safety, I know there are certain devices, including like little alarms now that they sell on Amazon, right? Birdie, that if you push that or pull it, it lets off an ear-piercing alarm. And that can also be something useful, and that can go on an airplane or wherever you're traveling.
Well, I want to thank you ladies for such an informative webinar and just giving us some things to think about should we ever, God forbid, be in a situation where we need this information.
I want to add in one more thing. I've just been Googling while we were talking. You have to be 18 to buy it in New York, and you cannot have an assault record or any felony convictions to purchase. I know that in other states, they're far more lax with that. In California, you can walk into Target and buy pepper spray. So if anyone's interested in pepper spray, it varies greatly, and just Google the requirements. But thank you all, and we all hope you're safe, and we thank you for taking the time to talk about this important topic.